Hello everyone and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Today we are here with the third session on science and technology, where we are going to discuss three important areas related to science and tech, and some of the key areas which have been in one way or the other appeared in your current affairs. So these three areas that we are going to discuss in today's lecture are related to biotechnology, IT and communication, and some areas related to diseases, COVID and vaccines. So these are the three broad areas into which I have categorized today's session. Now, when we look at these areas, you will see that many of these areas have been in news in one way or the other. They might not have been direct factual current affairs, but you will see that still there have been discussions about them. Some of these areas that we are going to discuss today, you will see that they have been a part of discussion not only in last maybe 1 year or so, or it has been more than that. You'll see that for at least 3-4 years, there have been a lot of discussions about all these kind of areas. So that's why we'll have a discussion on all these things. We'll try to understand each and every concept, and not only these concepts, we'll try to build upon that, so that if not from these questions that we are discussing, at least all these questions and all these topics that we are discussing here, all these topics are also going to be equally important for your examination. So let's begin. The first question that we have here is related to quantum computing. Consider the following statements with respect to quantum computing. 1. Quantum computers use qubits to store information. 2nd, quantum computers are error-free. And 3rd, quantum decoherence speeds up quantum computing. Now, quantum computing as a topic, I believe, is going to be important because there are a lot of new developments that we have seen in the country. Not only this year or not only last year, but maybe in the last 3-4 years, we have seen that there has been a rapid development in the field of quantum technology that has been happening in India. Not only that, we have also seen that there are certain reports and papers also being published on quantum computing. Very recently, we also saw that Niti Aayog also came up with its own article and its own programs with regards to what it wants to do with quantum technologies and where can India head with regards to quantum technologies. So that's why quantum technologies in general are going to be very, very important. But specifically speaking from the perspective of quantum technologies, one key aspect will be quantum computing. So that's why quantum computing has to be seen as a very, very important area from the perspective of your prelims examination. So let's first try to understand a basic of what do we mean by quantum computing, and we'll try to develop from there and some of the key areas from where we can expect something to come in the paper. So first and foremost, when we discuss about computers, in general, if you talk about computers and the language of computers, you might know that computers understand their own language. Just like how we understand our own languages, you'll find that computers also understand their own languages. So when you type something on the keyboard, you type it maybe in English or maybe in some other language that you understand. But the computer does not understand that language. Computer has a completely different language, and this language comprises of two very simple things, zeros and ones. And these zeros and ones basically make up things which are called as bits. And bits, you can say, is the language of the computer. So what we understand is that computers understand everything in terms of bits. And these bits are nothing but zeros and ones, a bunch of zeros and ones that computer might understand. So when you type something, let's say in English, it's not the English that computer understands, but first it translates it into its own language, and once it understands that language, it will start to give you the result in that language. Results will be computed in that language, that is the language of zeros and ones, and once it has been able to compute this, this is where it will translate it back to English, and that is what you would comprehend and you would understand. So this is basically what happens in computing language. Now, when we look at the bits and how the bits are computed by a computer, you'll see that if let's say there are 3 bits which are being utilized, then the number of states that will be produced will be 2 to the power of number of bits, which is let's say 8 in this case. So when we are looking at this segment, just understand this, that the number of states will be 2 to the power of number of bits. So if let's say there are 4 bits being utilized, then the number of states will be 2 to the power of 4, that is 16. If there are 5 bits being utilized, then the number of states will be 2 to the power of 5, that is 32, and so on. So how exactly are we saying that there are 8 states here? Something like this. We are only talking about a bunch of zeros and ones. So something like this, you will see that there are 8 states that we would be able to produce. Alright. So there are these 8 states that will be produced. Now, what happens in a normal computer is the fact that all these states, they will be computed one by one. They will be looked upon one by the computer. So for example, first it will go through this state. After it has gone through this state, it will move on to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next, and so on. So in this manner, we see that this computation happens sequentially. Alright, this computation happens sequentially. So let's say, I'm just taking as an example, let's say for one state, it takes 1 second to go through it. So if it takes 1 second to go through it, then if there are 8 states in total like this, then in total it will take how much? It will take 8 seconds, correct? So if there are 8 such states, it might take 8 seconds to compute the result. So that's why it will give you the result in 8 seconds. So this is happening why? Because this computation is happening sequentially. Now this is where we have quantum computers, and how quantum computers are different from a normal computer is on the basis of what they use as their basic language, and their basic language is a little different as compared to the basic computing language, and this language is called as a qubit. So the computation that happens in a quantum computer, it happens in terms of qubits. And what do we mean by qubits? Qubits stand for quantum bits, alright? They stand for quantum bits. So now these quantum bits also are a bunch of zeros and ones. So it's not that they are something different, something new. They are also a bunch of zeros and ones, but the difference comes in the way they compute the things, alright? The way they compute the things. So still it is a bunch of zeros and ones, and still you have the same number of states, that is 8, but the basic difference that comes in when it comes to a quantum computer is on the basis of the fact that here, instead of going through all the states one by one, it goes through all the states parallelly. So here what was happening sequentially is something that will happen parallelly, alright? This is something that will happen parallelly when it comes to a quantum computer. So that is the basic difference. Now because it goes through all the states parallelly, it is capable of doing that. Because of this, what happens is that now here that we saw, what we saw was that it took 8 seconds. Sorry. So it took 8 seconds here. Because here it is happening parallelly, it would only take 1 second. It would only take 1 second. So just imagine that where you were taking 8 seconds in doing one computation, here you are taking just 1 second. And this is not that it is only restricted to 2 bits or 3 bits. You keep on increasing the number of bits, and you will still see that the computation speed of a normal computer will keep on decreasing, whereas the computation speed of the quantum computer will still remain the same. And that is what is advantageous with quantum computers. That is why quantum computers are being seen as the future of computing. Right now we do not really have a lot of systems where quantum computers have been built, or in real-time applications where they are being used, but you will see that the way it is growing, we might expect that very soon quantum computers will become a very essential part of computing, especially the computation where large amount of data processing is required. So in all those cases, we might see that computation might start to happen very quickly, and this is where quantum computers may start to play their role. But in the current scenario, we still see that it is in the developmental phase, and there are a lot of multinational companies which are related to computations which are trying to work in this field. So whether you talk about Google or IBM or any other company like this, you will see that all these companies have been working on quantum computers, in building their own quantum computers. And the difference that we are talking about, the difference will be enormous. So for example, one of the quantum computers that has been built by Google, what it claims is that the calculation or the computation that might have been done by a normal computer in 10,000 years, in 10,000 years can be done by its quantum computer within 4 minutes. Within 4 minutes, 200 seconds to be exact is what they have claimed. So just imagine, on one hand you have 10,000 years, on the other hand you just have 4 minutes. So that is what we are talking about. This is the speed that we are discussing. So this is where we see that quantum computers perhaps will become very, very important once we are able to develop and stabilize the usage of quantum computers and quantum technologies in general. We might see that all these technologies might start to come into our lives. So that's why from this perspective, when we look at quantum computers, we can say that this is a very, very important concept, and India also has been working on it. We have seen that now we have a national quantum computing mission. Also, we saw that India started working, or DRDO also tested out quantum key distribution last year. So quantum key distribution has been tested. National quantum computing mission has been kept in place. The defense forces are also have started to work on the communication systems which are based on quantum technologies. So that's why we have seen that slowly and steadily there are a lot of steps which are being taken in the field of quantum computing in India. So that's why quantum computers might become a very, very important topic from the perspective of your examination as well. So let's go back to the question and see what we have here. First statement says what? Quantum computers use qubits to store information. This is correct. This is what we discussed, that instead of using bits which are used by normal computers, here we are using qubits which are being used by the quantum computer. So this is true. Second is quantum computers are error free. Now saying that they are error free is, I would say, a very extreme statement. That we are saying that there will be no error whatsoever when it comes to quantum computers. This is not correct. Although you can say that compared to normal computing, you might say that this is a kind of computing which is much better or much more efficient, much more error free, but you cannot say that it is completely error free. It will have much lesser errors as compared to the normal computers, but still it cannot be said to be completely error free. So that's why second statement I would not consider as a correct statement. Third statement says quantum decoherence speeds up the quantum computing. Now decoherence, what do we mean by quantum decoherence? Just understand this, that when we are using these quantum bits or qubits, these quantum bits sometimes may lose their properties. They might lose their properties, and they are very, very sensitive. The qubits are very, very sensitive. They have to be stored very well. You have to store them in conditions which are very much suitable for them. Slightest of the derailing from these conditions might mean that you see that quantum bits lose their properties. So they might lose their properties very soon. So we maintain very low temperature, we maintain kind of an interference free environment, we keep it completely isolated from air or from dust, etc. So we kind of keep it completely isolated. And unless we have kept the systems very much isolated, it becomes very, very difficult to control all these quantum bits. And under these conditions, it is very easy for the quantum bits to lose their properties. So that's why you will also see that if, let's say, 5 quantum bits are required, we carry 7 quantum bits. That just in the case, let's say, just in case, one of the quantum bits, they lose their property. If they lose their property, we should have a replacement. We should have a replacement in place, and with this replacement, we should be able to replace the quantum bit that has lost its property. So that's why what may happen with quantum bits, if proper conditions, specific conditions are not provided to them, then in that case what may happen is that they might lose their properties. And if they lose their properties, then in that case it is called as quantum decoherence. So what do we mean by quantum decoherence? Quantum decoherence means what? It means that if this is a scenario where qubits lose their properties. So then in that case, it will be called as quantum decoherence. Now, can quantum decoherence in such a scenario speed up quantum computing? It cannot. It will definitely lead to a slower speed in the quantum computing or an error that we might get in the quantum computer. So that's why this is also wrong. So we have been asked which of the following statements is or are correct. So there is only one statement which is correct, that is the first statement. So correct answer here will be one only. So just understand this. So quantum computers in general, I would say, is an important topic. There are two more concepts that I would suggest that you should know from the perspective of quantum computers. One is the principle of superposition, and then second is the concept of entanglement. These two properties, these two are quantum properties. These two are quantum properties which are very essential. These two are quantum properties which are very, very essential in the working of quantum computers. So that's why from the perspective of quantum computers, all these concepts may become important. What is the meaning of qubit? What is the meaning of quantum decoherence? What is the meaning of superposition? What is the meaning of entanglement? All these kind of concepts may become very, very important from the perspective of your examination. So if I just give you one line each about what we mean by superposition and what we mean by entanglement, in very simple words, just understand this. Because when we talk about quantum properties are very different. Quantum properties, you can say, if I just tell you what it is and how it behaves, you might feel that how even is that possible. So for example, superposition. What we see in superposition is that for all the, let's say if we have a group of quantum particles, let's say subatomic particles like electrons, etc. If we have a bunch of these particles together, unless we know what they are, or unless we know how they behave, we do not know how they behave, or unless we know where they are, we do not know where they are. So all their properties are linked in this manner that unless you know them, you do not know them. For example, let's say if you talk about me, unless I tell you from which studio I am right now taking your lecture, you can assume that I am taking the lecture from everywhere. So for example, let's say I may be taking the lecture from Kolkata, or maybe Delhi, or Mumbai, or Chennai, or Bangalore, or wherever. Unless I tell you where I am going, I am taking the lecture from, you can assume that I am taking the lecture from everywhere. So this is something that happens with the quantum properties of all these subatomic particles, that unless we specifically know about their properties, we can assume that they exist in all these states simultaneously. And that is the reason why we can compute all the states simultaneously, why we are able to do that simultaneously. So very unique, but this is something that is shown by all these quantum particles. Similarly, entanglement. In case of entanglement, what we say is that if there are two particles which are similar, which are associated with one another, then if these two particles are entangled, or if these two particles are being seen together or have been grouped together, then in that case, if you do slightest of the changes in one of these particles, the same property changes will be seen in the other particle as well. So there are two particles which are entangled with one another, so to say. If you make any change in one of these particles, the other particle will also show the same changes. So this is very unique, and this is something which is called as entanglement. This is something which was also predicted by Albert Einstein while he was working on his theory of relativity, and afterwards he had observed these things, and he had named this entanglement as spooky action at distance, because he did not understand what exactly was happening, but he did come across these kind of things, and he named it as spooky action at distance. So this is something that has been, that's why in discussions. So just understand that these are two concepts which are related to quantum properties and quantum computing in general. All right. Moving on, next question is related to deep web. Which of the following statements is incorrect with reference to deep web? Darknet is that part of the deep web which is inaccessible through traditional search engines and normal browsers. Deep web is a part of the surface web. Password protected websites including banking services are a part of deep web, and deep web platform provides information in encrypted form. Now let's try to understand first of all what do we mean by surface web, deep web and dark web. Now when you browse the internet, let's say you are searching for something. So when you search for something, you might go to a search engine like let's say on Google or Bing or whatever search engine you want to use. So you go to this search engine, and when you go to that search engine, you just type for something, correct? And once you type the information that you wanted, you see a bunch of results that comes up. So all these results that you see, they are a part of surface web. So what do we mean by surface web? Surface web is that part of the internet which is indexed or which is searchable. All right. So surface web, we will say that surface web is that part of the internet which is indexed. Which is indexed. So that's why it is called as surface web, because this is something that actually can be, this is something that can actually be seen or that can actually be searched. So all the search results that you get, all the pages that you get, you are able to get them, you are able to see them because they are a part of surface web. So that's why when you do a normal search or on a search engine, this is what you get. So that's why Wikipedia, Google, Facebook, all these Bing, etc., they all can be considered as a part of surface web. So now this surface web, because most of the things that you are able to search, whatever you try to search, you are able to search them. So you might think that, okay, maybe surface web is the part of the is the part of the internet which basically is searchable and should be the biggest part of the internet. But that's not true. What you will find is that surface web perhaps is not more than 5% of the entire internet. So that's why we depict it like an iceberg, that what you see in an iceberg is only a small part of the entire iceberg. Almost more than 90% of the iceberg is below water, and what you see is almost maybe just 10% of the entire thing. So something similar happens with the internet as well. The indexed part, the searchable part that we have, the things that we are able to search for, all these are the ones for which there is a database which is being maintained. And because they are a part of the database, it is indexed and it is searchable. So that's why as soon as you type something, it appears as a part of the database and it shows and pushes the information that you wanted to search for. So this surface web is perhaps not more than 5% of the entire internet. The rest is deep web. So what is deep web? Deep web is that part of the internet which is not searchable. Now what is not searchable? For example, let's say if you have a banking account, if you have been using net banking, I cannot simply go and search for your username and password and I will not get it as a Google result, correct? Why? Because it is non-indexed. This is the part which is hidden. This is the part which is not taken as a part of the database that is maintained, something which is searchable. So that's why all these things, whether it is about any website or any application, wherever you have to log in, where there is a login required, all these pages will be hidden because we do not really want, correct? You wouldn't want that somebody should be able to search for your username and password. So these are the things which will be kept away. So they become a part of deep web. They all become a part of deep web, and that's where the bigger chunk of the internet basically is deep web. That is the part which is called as deep web. So that's why in case of deep web, we know that this contains everything that is not searchable. So everywhere, I mean any website, whether your social media platforms or anywhere, wherever you have to log in, wherever you have to log in to see your personal information, all these become a part of the deep web. Apart from that, we see that all the subscription information, all the government resources, all the legal documents, all these kind of things, they will be kept as a part of deep web, because most of the times we do not want anyone to know about these things. We do not want anyone to be able to search these things, correct? So that's why they all will be kept as a part of the deep web. Now there is a small part, or rather let's say a significant part of the deep web which many a times is also illegal. Many a times also uses things which are against the ethos, which are against what should be done. So in all these cases, they become a part of the dark net. So we see that there are two parts. One, I am saying that we have something called as surface web. So you have something called as the surface web, and then you have another part which is the deep web. Now inside this deep web there is one chunk which is called as the dark web. It is called as the dark web. So dark web, basically just understand this, that dark web has to be considered as a part of the deep web. You have to consider them as a part of the deep web. So they are a portion of the deep web, and this portion of the deep web, which is called as dark web or dark net, also is used. This is where we see that a lot of completely private communications are kept. Many of the illegal activities are happening here. For example, drug trafficking might happen and does happen through the darknet, because darknet is one part which is completely hidden. Even entire deep web, we know that it is the hidden part, the non-indexed part. So in case of dark web, what we see is that it is indexed, it is non-indexed, it is completely encrypted, it is hidden from the basic websites. So in this manner we try to keep it hidden, and that's why we see that a lot of illegal activities, they do happen through the dark web. So that's why they have become a menace for the agencies, for the government agencies all across the world. So that is what darknet has. That's why we have a problem with the darknet. Although darknet can be used for, let's say, even political protests or any kind of planning like this, because they do not want the authorities to know, otherwise there can be action taken against them. So that's why all these things which we completely want to be hidden away, all these will be a part of the dark web. So this is how surface web, deep web and dark web are different. Another topic associated with this which can be important is virtual private network, VPN. And VPN very recently was also in the news, because of the fact that the government wants all the VPN networks to share the data, share the user data and compile or keep the user data. So that goes against what virtual private network basically stands for, because virtual private network is basically a private network which has been established between two systems. And this network or communication that has been established, it is completely supposed to be encrypted, and even the IP addresses of these two systems will be completely hidden, so that they cannot be tracked easily. Now if the government wants to keep a track of what should not be tracked, then in that case there is no point of having the VPN at all. So that's why VPN is something that has been in use from that perspective. Alright, let's go back to the question. First is darknet is that part of the deep web which is inaccessible through traditional search engines and normal browsers. So this looks to be correct. This is what we have discussed about deep web or even darknet, that dark web is something which is completely hidden and not searchable easily, or not searchable at all because it is non-indexed. Deep web is a part of the surface web. Now can this be correct? We are saying that one is deep web, one is surface web. So they are completely different. So should not be correct. So that's why this is wrong, and sorry. So we have been asked to point out the incorrect statement. So incorrect statement anyway is B. Password protected websites including banking services are a part of deep web. We discussed this. Deep web platforms provide information in encrypted form. This is also correct, and that's why they are not easily searchable. And that's why for anything that has to be password protected, they have to be encrypted, and they will be a part of deep web. So this is how we understand the basic differences between what is dark web, what is deep web and what is surface web. Let's move on to the next question. Consider the following applications of supercomputing: data mining, weather forecasting and intelligence gathering and analysis. Supercomputer, again a very important topic. We have seen that a lot of new supercomputers have become a part of the Indian setup. For example, in December there was new supercomputer which was installed in Punjab for agricultural purposes. There's another one that is Param Pravega, which has become a part of the National Supercomputing Mission and has been installed in IASC Bangalore. So we have seen that there are a lot of new supercomputers which have been added to the Indian setup, either as a part of the National Supercomputing Mission or in general for one activity or the other. So that's why supercomputers have been in the news. So since 2015 we have seen that the National Supercomputing Mission was taken, but since then we have seen that slowly, gradually we have been adding more supercomputers to the Indian setup. So first and foremost, what do we mean by supercomputers? And second, let's try to understand where their applications are. So first and foremost, when we say supercomputer, what we mean is that this is a kind of computer or a kind of computing system which will be able to give out results very fast, which will be able to compute the results much faster, much faster as compared to a normal computer. So that's why it is named as supercomputer. Now in case of supercomputers, what we see is that they are very specific. They are meant for only specific applications. So for example, if we have a supercomputer which is meant for, let's say, a satellite image processing, then it will only perform one function, and that is satellite image processing. If we have another supercomputer which is meant for, let's say, understanding of genetics, then it will only do its study and research only in the field of genetics. So that's why we see that all these supercomputer applications or all these supercomputers that we have been building, these are very specific in nature. It's not like the normal computers that you and I have been using, where we do a bunch of stuff on the computer. We work on the entire office on the computer itself. We might watch movies on the computer itself. We might play games on the computer itself. So we know that there are a lot of things that we do together or we can do together on a normal general purpose computer. But compared to that, in a supercomputer, we would be able to do only a specific kind of task, but that task can be done at a much faster pace as compared to any normal general purpose computer. So that's why this is where supercomputers are important, because they, first of all, yes, they are specific, but they are very fast, and their computation, the speed that is computed for the supercomputers, the computation is done in terms of something called as petaflops. Petaflops. Now what do we mean by peta? Peta basically is a prefix that we use for how much? For 10 to the power of 15. For 10 to the power of 15, we use peta. So you start with kilo, then you have mega, then you have giga, then you have tera, and then you have peta. So flops, what do we mean by flops? Flops basically stands for floating point operations per second. Floating point operations per second. Now what do we mean by floating point operations per second? It basically means how many operations, how many mathematical operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, etc., how many such operations can be computed or can be done by any computing system in a given frame of time, or let's say in a given second. So when we say petaflops, what we mean is that we are trying to compute 10 to the power of 15 times the number of operations per second. So this is how we compute the speed of supercomputers. Right now, the fastest supercomputer that we have in the world is called as Fugaku. And Fugaku is supposed to have a speed of almost 442 petaflops. 442 petaflops. Now what do we mean by 442 petaflops? 442 into 10 to the power of 15 floating point operations can be performed in 1 second. So many of these operations can be done by this fastest supercomputer of the world in just 1 second. Now if you talk about the Indian supercomputers, you will see that most of our supercomputers have a peak performance of almost 3 to 3.5 petaflops. Now you might think that 3 to 3.5 petaflops is a very slow speed as compared to what we see here, but even a speed of 3 petaflops is a significant speed. It's a very good speed to have. And yes, we have been working on having faster supercomputers, in having faster computation speeds, but right now we have a peak performance of almost 3 to 3.5 petaflops, which is also a very good speed to have. So in India, the fastest of the supercomputers, although in the world map they are not really in the top 50, but still we are growing slowly and gradually, and we might very soon see some of significant events or significant improvements in our supercomputers as well. So let's look at 3 application areas that have been listed out. One is data mining, second is weather forecasting, and third is intelligence gathering and analysis. All of the three given here, of course, can be done with the help of supercomputers. There are no exceptions here. Wherever you need higher amount of data processing, wherever you need faster data processing, you can go for supercomputers. You can develop supercomputers for that particular purpose. So that's why all these three can be done with the help of supercomputers. So that's why the correct answer here will be D, that is 1, 2 and 3. Moving on, the next question. The next question is on RFID, that is radio frequency identification. Consider the following applications of radio frequency identification technology. 1. Tracking supply chain network. Second, fast tag, and third, ammunition tracking. Now, very recently RFID was also in news, because for ammunition the Indian Army now will be using RFID, that each and every ammunition that Indian arsenal has, everything will be tagged, each and everything will be tagged with an RFID. So that is why it was also in news, and that's why of course the third statement that we see here will be correct. Now first and foremost, what do we mean by RFID? Try to understand this. So RFID stands for what? RFID stands for radio frequency identification, meaning what? That it will try to identify radio signals or radio waves. So it will try to identify the radio waves. This is what the basic task of an RFID system is. Now what happens here is basically that there is a reader, and this reader will be giving out or sending out the radio waves, and these radio waves basically will be tracked, or it will be caught by an RFID tag. So this RFID tag will track this down, or will be able to catch it up, and once it catches it up, it will also release it, and the antennas basically which is there as a part of the RFID system, they would be able to comprehend the information. So in this manner we will be able to get the information, track the information with the help of RFID. Now what we have seen is that RFID has been very significant from the perspective that the communication that can be established between the two, between the reader and the tag, will be very fast. It does not require line of sight, meaning that even through boundaries, even through walls, RFID can work. So that's why it has significant applications. Specifically, if we look at the applications in the supply chain, in the warehouses, there we see that it has significant applications. So that's why tracking supply chain networks, yes, for sure RFID can be used there. RFID will be very helpful when it comes to these kind of networks in supply chain, or in general in warehouses, even in libraries for example. So that's why in all these cases in supply chain, so that's why warehouses or even libraries, all these areas, all these places, we can make the use of RFID. Then after that, the second one says fast tag, and yes, we have been using it on fast tag. That's the second reason why RFID has been so much in use, because the fast tag network that has been established all over the country, for each and every toll plaza that we have in the country, fast tag has been installed there. So that's why fast tag has been important from that perspective, because fast tag has been using RFID, and that's why RFID has been brought to notice with fast tag also. Then ammunition tracking. Even ammunition tracking can be done, and very recently, just a few months back, we saw that Indian Army now has started the tagging of all the ammunition, so that a database of all the ammunition can be kept. For safety purposes also it is something which is important, for security purposes it is important, and this is something that will be now done by the Indian Army. So Indian Army will be maintaining RFIDs for each and every ammunition that the Indian arsenal has. So that is the reason also why it was in news. So yes, ammunition tracking can also be done with the help of RFID. So that's why all these three given here, all these three application areas given here, all these three application areas are correct. So all these three are the areas where we can make the use of RFIDs. Alright, moving on, another question related to the same topic, that is RFID. E-passports will utilize which of the following technologies? Again, recently done by the Government of India, that For e-passports, RFID will be tagged in the e-passports so that all the information about an individual, all the biometric information about the individual, everything will be stored in this RFID, and this RFID, that's why, will become a part of the e-passports. So that's why e-passports will carry what? E-passports will carry RFID. So they will be based on RFID. So just remember this, that they will be based on RFID, and that is again another reason why RFID has been in the news. Moving on, the next question. So until now, this was the first part where we have seen some questions related to IT and communication, and IT and communication in general will be a very important part. Apart from that, there are other areas also which will be important from IT perspective. One such key topic I would say is 5G. So I would say that when you revise everything with regards to this examination, please make sure that 5G is also a part of your preparation. It is also a part of your last minute revision. Alright, moving on to the next segment, to the next part, that is related to biotechnology. So the recently conducted clinical trials of chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy may emerge as a breakthrough in the treatment of which of the following conditions? So something that in short is called as CAR T therapy. Right, CAR T therapy. Now in this case, in case of CAR T therapy, this is something that has been tested out, that has been successfully tested out. Some trials have been done with it, and we found that this is something that can be significant in treating one particular disease, that is cancer. So in the treatment of cancer, specifically blood cancer, we found that this is something which can be a very, very important tool. Now what exactly do we mean by CAR T? What do we mean by CAR T therapy, and what happens in CAR T therapy? Just try to understand this, that what is the mechanism that we are using when it comes to the CAR T therapy. Now if we look at the words CAR, so if you look at the word, we have chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy. So chimeric, what is the meaning of chimeric? Chimeric would mean that it is coming from another organism, correct? Now what is coming from another organism? We are getting a receptor T cell or a receptor from another organism or another genetic makeup, you can say. Now when it comes to our immune system, we know that in general whatever infections we have, these infections will be fought off with the help of the immune system. Now as a part of the immune system, we have white blood cells, and these white blood cells are very significant in fighting any invader, fighting anything that is unwanted, that is not a part of the body. So whether it's a pathogen, whether it's a toxin, whatever it is, our immune system will fight it, and fight with the help of what? Fight with the help of white blood cells. So that's why white blood cells become very, very important, and in that particularly we have two kinds of cells, B cells and T cells, right? We have two kinds of cells, we have B cells and we have T cells, and these two are very, very important. These two are very, very important in trying to fight any infection, or any anything that is an outsider, an invader, a toxin, whatever it is. So that's why these two cells are important. Now what we are doing with this CAR T therapy is this, that first what we do is that we draw blood out of the patient. We draw some blood out of the patient, and from this blood we take their T cells. Alright. Now what are T cells related to? T cells are in general, what T cells basically do is that they would destroy anything that has been marked for destruction. Meaning that any pathogen or any toxin that our immune system has marked that this needs to be destroyed, it will be destroyed with the help of T cells. Alright. So T cells also form the memory cells, and later on also they can fight off the infection in a similar manner. So T cells will help in fighting the infection by killing the infection, killing the antigen. So T cells are important from that perspective. Now these T cells many a times will not know how to fight a disease. If they do not know how to fight a disease, if the body has not been able to make a mechanism to fight off a disease, then in that case that may not happen. It may not be possible to do at all. So that's why what we do here is that first of all, blood will be drawn, some blood will be drawn from the patient's body, and then from there on T cells will be taken away. Alright, T cells will be taken out of the blood that has been drawn. Now the next thing that is done is that here there is a gene that will be inserted inside the T cell. Alright, and this basically will become the chimeric antigen receptor or CAR. So this is something that will be added. This gene will be added to the T cell. Now once the gene has been added, what happens is that now this T cell, it has these receptors. Alright, now it has all these receptors. So these receptors, they are called as chimeric antigen receptor. So what happens now is, now until now there was no receptor, correct? Until now there was no receptor, but now we have a receptor. So because we have a receptor now, this basically what we'll do is that once we have this receptor, we will create millions of copies of this. We'll create a lot of copies of this kind of a cell where you have a T cell with the chimeric receptors. So once we have many copies, lakhs of copies of this is something that will be inserted back in the patient. Alright, this will be inserted back in the patient. Now what happens is that this cell that we have now, alright, this chimeric cell that we have now, this is now capable of fighting the cancer cell. So what they will be able to do is that they will be able to bind themselves to the antigens that is present on the cancer cell. Now just remember this, that in general also when we look at the pair of antigen and antibodies, what happens is that you can say antigens, they act like locks and antibodies are the keys, or let's say you can say that antibodies are a part of the unsolved puzzle and they would set into the puzzle and they will be able to solve the puzzle. So that's why they are a part of the unsolved puzzle and they are able to solve this out. So what happens in this case, what happens in the case of this receptor also is that all the antigens which are present on the cancer cells, now they can be detected. Alright, they can be detected now and now they can be destroyed. So until now the T cells, they did not have the capacity. Just remember this, that until now the T cells did not have the capacity to fight off the cancer cells, but now with these receptors will be able to bind themselves on the antigens and they will be able to mark the cancer cells for destruction. They will be able to destroy the cancer cells. So that's why, because they will be able to destroy the cancer cells, that's why they are so important. That's why they are so important from the perspective of the solving the issue of blood cancer, or in general they can actually be able to help in this segment of treatment of blood cancer. So that's why this is basically what will happen in this entire process. This is what becomes the process of CAR T therapy. So where exactly will we be using CAR T therapy? We can make the use of CAR T therapy in the treatment of cancer. Specifically, it has been tested against blood cancer. So it might be able to help there, and so that's why we are looking at a future where perhaps we for the first time are looking at a very short technology that can help against blood cancer. Alright, moving on to the next question. With reference to de-oiled genetically modified soya cake, consider the following statements. 1. It acts as a source of vitamin for the poultry feed sector in India. It is considered to be an important raw material. In the recent order of the Directorate General of Foreign Trade, which cleared the import of this item, this was classified as a non-living GM crop. So two things. Now, if you look at the first statement, so first of all, we are talking about something called as de-oiled GM soya cake. Now, what do we mean by de-oiled genetically modified soya cake? So, this is something that in the context of, if you want to know where exactly this comes from. So last year what we saw was that there was a shortage of poultry feed that we were looking at. During the COVID times, during the lockdown, we saw that there was a significant reduction in the supply that was happening, which also increased the total demand. I mean, demand obviously remained constant, but overall you can say that the prices increased. So prices increased significantly. In some of the cases we have seen that prices increased from 40 to 100. and this was a significant increase. A normal 5%, 10%, even a 20% increase would have been okay. But here we are looking at a significant increase in prices, because of which prices of soya bean basically, because of which we saw that the poultry industry also has been suffering, because there the total operational cost has usually increased because of this. So this is where the government of India decided that this de-oiled genetically modified soya cakes will be imported by India. Alright, it will be imported by India, and with this import, whatever shortages we have, we will try to bring down the shortages and bring down the prices that have risen significantly. So this is why it was in news. Now let's look at the statements that we have. The first statement is, it acts as a source of vitamin for poultry feed sector in India. Now soya in general is not a source of vitamin. What is it a source for? Proteins. So that's why saying that it is a source of vitamins is not correct. So this we can strike off, this is not correct. In the recent order of the Directorate General of Foreign Trade, which cleared the import of this item, this was classified as a non-living GM crop. Now this is very, very important, because when it was passed by the government, when it was allowed by the government, there were a couple of eyebrows which were raised, couple of protests that happened, that first of all, this is genetically modified crop, so it should not be brought into India. And also because soya bean, there are farmers who are growing soya bean, so what happens to that? So these kind of issues were being raised. So now in this case, what the government said is that here we will not need the genetic engineering appraisal committee, mainly because of the fact that this is something that is non-living, which can be considered as a non-living GM crop. So because it's a non-living GM crop, we need not be worried about it, and it can be very easily be imported to India without any problem, and it will not have any environmental problems, is what was said by the government. So that's why from the perspective of, when you look at this, they said that why we are able to bring it, why we can bring this without any hesitation, is because of the fact that it can be considered as a non-living GM organism or a GM crop. So that's why it was cleared, and that's why this is the second statement is correct. That's why the second statement is correct. So the first statement is wrong, the second statement is correct. We have been asked what is incorrect in this answer, in this question. So that's why the first statement is incorrect, the second statement is correct. All right. Moving on to the next question. Consider the following actions taken or to be taken by the government of India to promote synthetic biology. So synthetic biology is something that has been asked here. Now in case, so if you look at the two statements that have been given, the first statement is that 12th five-year plan had supported the development of this subject. The government has set up a task force in pursuance of this. Second is the Biotechnology Regulatory Authority of India will be set up in pursuance of the Cartagena Protocol. So we are talking about synthetic biology. So synthetic biology is what? When you are trying to create an organism, remember this, when you are trying to create an organism with certain properties, maybe with the help of genetic engineering, but you are trying to create certain organisms which have certain properties or certain, let's say, desirable properties. So in that case, it becomes a part of synthetic biology. So that's why synthetic biology, in a manner, you can say that it is a sub-part of biotechnology. It is not different from biotechnology. You can say that it comes under the purview of biotechnology. So this is what synthetic biology is. So the first statement that we have, this is correct, that the 12th five-year plan had supported the development of this subject, and the government had taken up a task force in pursuance of this. And then the second option is also correct, that Biotechnology Regulatory Authority of India will be set up in pursuance with the Cartagena Protocol. So that's why these two statements, both the statements given about synthetic biology, they are correct. Now so that's why the correct statement is C, that is both 1 and 2. Both the statements given here, they both are correct. All right, moving on, the next question, again related to synthetic biology itself. So a simple direct question, I'm just giving it because they have been in the news, so that's why you should know about what they are and how exactly we need to look at them. With reference to synthetic biology, which of the following international conventions governs its various processes? 1. Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. 2nd. Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. And 3rd. Convention on Biological Diversity. Which of the following? All these. All the three. When we look at synthetic biology or the development of synthetic biology, it has to happen in accordance with all these international conventions and protocols which have been kept in place with regards to biotechnology or with regards to biodiversity or the movement of the living organisms or living genetically modified living organisms. And that's why when we go to the de-oiled GM soybean cake, we know that the movement is allowed and movement has no problems, mainly because it is non-living. GM soya cakes are non-living, and that's what Government of India also had said. But here the synthetic biology part, when we discuss about synthetic biology, it is something that talks about organisms which are genetically modified for enhancing one characteristic or the other. And if, let's say, any kind of research and any kind of study is happening, it needs to happen in accordance with all these conventions and protocols, the international conventions and protocols that we have. So that's why all these three given here are correct. So correct answer here will be D, that is 1, 2 and 3. Moving on, the next question, with reference to genetically modified rubber, consider the following statements. 1. It has been developed by the rubber board and it has been planted near Kochi in Kerala. And 2nd, it has additional copies of manganese containing superoxide dismutase, which is expected to help the rubber plant tide over severe winter conditions. Now, the first thing is, if you look at the two statements that have been given, recently again GM rubber, last year it was in news. Why exactly was it news? Because for the first time this GM rubber was planted. But where was it planted? It was planted in Assam. It was planted in Assam near Guwahati. Alright, it was planted in Assam near Guwahati. So that's why saying that it was planted in Kochi is wrong. So that's why the first statement is not correct, and even then it was not developed by the rubber board but by Rubber Research Institute of India. So that's why both the parts of the sentence here are wrong, neither by rubber board nor in Kochi. So Rubber Research Institute of India, they are working on it, again based in Kerala, and then this is something that has been developed and it has been, for the first time it has been planted in Assam, basically for what? For what has been written in the second statement. So first is wrong, the second statement is correct, that it has additional copies of manganese containing superoxide dismutase, which is expected to help the rubber plant tide over severe winter conditions. So that's why this is correct, and this is precisely why this kind of a variant has been made. So that's why 1 is wrong, 2 is correct. We have been asked what is incorrect. So the incorrect statement is A, that is only 1. So this is what the answer is, and just these are the small events that have been in the news. Then another thing that was in news, and this was again almost I think December 2021 when it was in news, and this is about dark genome. Consider the following statements regarding dark genome. 1. It is present outside our genomic space and is useful in decoding some protein. And 2nd, recent research has enabled scientists to study these proteins and distinguish between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now, first and foremost, it is, when it comes to dark genome, just understand that dark genome is something that accounts for almost 98 to 99% of the genomic space. Alright, almost 98 to 99% of genomic space is occupied by the dark genome, and this dark genome is something that is sometimes also seen outside the nuclear space where most of the DNA is present. So when it comes to dark genome, it is the second part, it is useful in decoding some protein, is completely wrong. It is nothing to do with decoding of the proteins. So that's why the first statement is not correct. the first statement with regards to what dark genome is not correct. Now, where did dark genome come in the news? It came in the news from the perspective of two of the mental disorders. One is schizophrenia and second is bipolar disorders, because these are the two disorders which are not very well understood yet. They are not very well understood, and that's why the diagnosis and the treatment of these two have not been very easy. The diagnosis and treatment have not been very easy when it comes to these two mental disorders. So that's why here this small development that has happened, that the understanding of these two diseases or these two mental disorders, what are they? One is bipolar disorder, and the second one is schizophrenia. So what the scientists have claimed is that it would give them the opportunity to understand these two, and maybe in the coming days they would be able to understand these two disorders much better and have a treatment or a diagnosis for these two in a much better manner as compared to what or where we are currently. Now, in the last couple of years, the developments or the discussions on mental health disorders and mental health in general have been huge, and you might see that even since the COVID lockdowns, we have seen that a lot of discussions have been happening on the mental disorders and understanding of mental health. So that's why mental health can be an important topic, maybe not from the perspective of science, but maybe in one way or the other, mental health and mental health disorders in this year's examination perhaps can be an important topic. So that's why this is something which is related to it, and maybe you have an off chance that something like this can be asked in the paper. Next question. So coming back, recent research has enabled the scientists to study these proteins and distinguish between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now again, this is also not correct. It is not related to diabetes, but rather it is related to schizophrenia and bipolar disorders. So that's why both the statements are wrong. So that's why correct answer here will be D, that is neither 1 nor 2. All right, moving on. India has been ranked 4th amongst 20 countries in terms of the number of biological databases. The recently released Biotech Pride Guidelines, Promotion of Research and Innovation through Data Exchange, seeks to democratize the subject of science and technology and research in India. So, first of all, when it comes to the ranking part, that India has been ranked 4th, this is something which is actually correct, that this did happen, and this is a ranking that was done by whom? It was a ranking that was done by Database Commons. So just understand that, just remember that this ranking is something that was done by Database Commons. So now with regards to the same, what we see is that there is a new program that was released again last year. It was month of, I think, June or July when it was launched. So recently released Biotech Pride Guidelines seeks to democratize the subject of science and technology and research in India. Now even this is correct. This is basically why Biotech Pride was basically released, because it basically will help the Indian science community to organize and to work together from various fields and come together and collaborate. So all these things can happen, and this is basically what we are trying through this particular program. So that's why both are correct. So what we have been asked is to mark what is incorrect. So both are correct. So that's why here we can say that the correct answer here will be D, that is none of the above. So because both the statements given here are correct statements. So not a lot we have seen in the biotechnology sector, but these are some of the key areas from where, if at all there is a chance, these are some of the areas from where they might ask you some of these questions. All right, moving on to our last part of the segment for today, and this is related to diseases and COVID and vaccines as well. So the next 10, 11 questions that we have will discuss about all these areas. So this is perhaps an area which is more factual in nature as compared to what we have discussed until now. But some of these areas, just mark the areas because these can perhaps in one way or the other can be important. All right. The first question. OC 43, HKU1, 229E and NL 63 are mentioned in the context of A. Genes introduced in the genetically modified plants, mild variants of coronavirus, vaccine for tuberculosis, and synthetic culture fungi. Now here, what are these? These are mild variants of coronavirus. So there are two sets of coronavirus that we see. One is this set, and this set is basically a set of all the mild coronavirus cases. So this is where these coronavirus variants, they might cause, let's say, common cold or cough and some of these mild symptoms. They may happen due to these coronavirus variants. And then there are the other set of coronavirus variants which can be harmful, which can be deadly. And there are three names there. One is SARS or SARS-CoV. The second one is MERS-CoV. And the third one is SARS-CoV-2. So these are the three which can be life threatening. These are the ones which are much more dangerous and much more, you can say, also difficult to stop. So when it comes to SARS-CoV, we know that this caused the disease that is SARS. MERS-CoV caused the disease that is MERS, that is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And then SARS-CoV-2 has been the reason for COVID-19. So COVID-19 has been caused by SARS-CoV-2. So these are the three variants. These are the three variants which are dangerous variants. And then we have other mild variants which have been listed out in this question. So that's why the correct answer here will be B, that these are what? These are mild variants of coronavirus. Moving on, the next question, which of the following statements regarding the variants of coronavirus is incorrect? So first is NeoCov shares an 85% similarity to MERS-CoV in the genome sequence and it does not interact with human receptors. We'll understand what we mean here. Second is MERS-CoV was transferred to humans through infected dromedary camels. Third is COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus. And fourth is BA2 is a subvariant of MERS-CoV. Alright, so these are the four statements given here, and what we have been asked is to point out which of the given statements is incorrect. So let's look at all these statements one by one and try to analyze this. The first is NeoCov shares an 85% similarity to MERS-CoV in the genome sequence and it does not interact with human receptors. Now first and foremost, what do we mean by receptors? We just discussed that there are receptors that can bind onto proteins. These are receptors that can bind onto proteins, and that's why antigens may very easily come and affect or infect the human cells. So human receptors, they do not respond to NeoCov is what is being said here, and this is correct. That what we have seen with NeoCov is that NeoCov is another virus variant which is very similar to MERS-CoV, which is very similar to MERS, almost 85% similar to MERS, but it is not found in humans. It does not infect humans yet. And that's why there are a lot of studies going on with the NeoCov to understand whether there are possibilities or whether it can in the future lead to one kind of infection or the other in the humans. So that is why NeoCov has been introduced. Basically, it is found in bats, something that is given in India. So what do we mean by accelerated approval? So what happens is that under some emergency conditions, under certain emergency conditions, we might need to start using certain vaccines and drugs very quickly. So for example, even if you consider the case of COVID-19, so in case of COVID-19 also, we wanted to start using the vaccines very quickly. So that's why all these vaccines that were approved in India, they went into this particular forum, that is accelerated approval. So that accelerated approval or very quick approvals can be provided to these vaccines as quickly as possible on the basis of some of the other factors other than the normal clinical trials that anyway happen for all these new drugs and medicines. So this is something that is a part of the segment that we do in India. So that's why this third statement also is wrong. The third statement is also wrong because this is related to India and the second statement is related to the US. So we have been asked that which of the following is correct. So there is only one statement which is correct, which is one only. So correct answer here will be B, that is one only. All right. Moving on, the next question. Consider the following statements regarding the COVID vaccine intelligence network. 1. It has been developed by the Ministry of Science and Technology. 2nd, it facilitates real-time information of vaccine stocks, storage temperature, and tracks the listed beneficiaries for COVID-19 vaccination. So here we are talking about COVID vaccine intelligence network. Now about this network, what you see in the second statement is actually correct, and this is precisely what this COVID network or COVID intelligence network is. That this is basically about understanding of how many vaccines are available, where the vaccines are available, whether the vaccines are stored in given conditions or not, the tracking of the users, the tracking of who needs to get the vaccination, all these things. So for example, the CoWIN app. So CoWIN app is also a part of this particular network. So all these things are being done as a part of this entire network, as a part of this entire setup. All right. So that's why this is what we are looking at. So when we look at the first statement, it has been developed by the Ministry of Science and Technology. This is not correct because this is where we saw that this was done by Ministry of Health, or I'm just writing in short, it was done by the Health Ministry. All right, it was done by the Health Ministry. So Health Ministry has been taking care of it. All right, Health Ministry has been taking care of it. So that's why the first statement is not correct. The second statement is correct. So that's why here first statement is wrong. The second statement is correct. So that's why the correct answer here will be all right. So what I've been told is that there were certain problems that we were facing with the audio. So what I'll do is that we will repeat the part from where we have seen this. So from this question, I'm going to repeat this. All right. I'm going to repeat it from here so that you understand what we discussed here. So which of the following statements, so I'm just erasing it so that I can explain it to you that what exactly are we looking at. All right. So here what we have been asked is, that which of the following are incorrect. All right. Which of the following statements given here are incorrect. So first is NeoCov shares 85% similarity to MERS-CoV in the genome sequence and it does not interact with human receptors. So we need to understand first of all what do we mean by receptors and whether this statement is correct or not. We have been asked to point out which one of the following is incorrect. So first and foremost, when we look at NeoCov was in news and it was in news because of this, because of the fact that this is where we see that it is a kind of virus, a variant of the virus which shares 85% similarity, almost 85% similarity with what? With the MERS virus. So that's why it was in news, because it shares this similarity. Now at this time, when we are looking at this, what we are saying as the second part of the sentence is that it does not interact with human receptors. Is this correct? Yes, this is correct. Because what happens is that we have receptors. Now, when we talk about human receptors, something that we discussed in one of the earlier questions as well, when we look at these receptors, these human receptors, they will receive the proteins, they will bind the proteins. So that's why any antigen, they would attack the receptors. Any antigen that comes into the body, they would attack the receptors. So these human receptors, if let's say they are coordinating with the virus, then in that case the virus might infect the human. But in general that does not happen. In general that does not happen, because what happens is that when you look at viruses, you might find that viruses are very specific in nature, that they would only infect a certain species, or they would only infect a certain plant or an animal. So in general we see that. So let's say for example, if you have a particular plant virus, then it might not infect a human. It might not infect any other mammal, for example, but it would affect the plants. Similarly, if we have a human virus, the human virus may not infect any other animal, but sometimes they do jump species. We have seen this in case of COVID-19, that they do jump species in certain cases, and if they jump species, this is where they can become very, very dangerous. So this is why it is something which is under research, because NeoCov almost has 85% similarity with MERS-CoV. So that's why there are high chances that it may be not today, maybe not in 10 days, or maybe even in not 10 years, but maybe someday it might become infectious for humans. So that's why research is happening on that. So this is correct, all right, this statement is correct. Second statement is MERS-CoV was transferred to humans through infected dromedary camels. This is correct. This is what happened in the West Asia, in Saudi Arabia specifically, where it started from. So this is also correct. The third statement, COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus. So SARS-CoV-2 virus. So that's why when we look at this particular disease, we know that COVID-19 happened due to SARS-CoV-2. So this is also correct. We saw this in one of the earlier questions as well. BA2 is a subvariant of MERS-CoV. Now this is wrong, because what is BA2? BA2 is a variant of Omicron. This is a variant of Omicron, also called as stealth Omicron. Sometimes mentioned as stealth Omicron. So you might remember that earlier this year also we saw a lot of spike in the number of cases that we saw in India, and this is basically where we had a new variant, which was the Omicron variant. And because of the Omicron variant, we saw a huge spike in the number of cases in India. So this is where there was another variant, a sub-variant of Omicron, which also had come up, and this was BA2, and that's why it is also called as stealth Omicron. So not a sub-variant of MERS-CoV, correct? What is it? It is a variant of SARS-CoV-2, because it is a variant of coronavirus, a COVID-19 virus. So that's why the last statement, this statement is wrong, and this is what we have been asked to mark the incorrect option. So this is the incorrect option here. So this is wrong. Moving on, the next question again, let me erase this up and then I'll explain this again. All right. So consider the following statements in the context of approval of new vaccines. 1. In India, clinical trials and approval of new drugs, including vaccines, are governed by the new drugs and clinical trial rules that were notified in March 2019. Second is the provision of emergency use authorization has been provided in the Indian rules since 2019. And the third one is accelerated approval in special situations is a provision adopted in the United States. Now here the first statement is correct, that we saw that this is the clinical trials and approval of new drugs is something that was done or notified in March 2019, and a new set of rules were introduced in India. Now after this, if you look at the second statement, which is talking about emergency use authorization, Now, emergency use authorization is a process which was more famous, or which was in the news in the context of the USA, because in the USA emergency use authorization is a part of their policy, and that's why under this policy they have been providing this emergency use authorization to some of the drugs and vaccines. The third one is, so that's why this is wrong, it is not in the Indian rules, but it is a part of the US notified rules. The third is accelerated approval in special situations is a provision adopted in the United States. Now, this is not United States, this is something that has been a part of the Indian rules. This has been a part of the Indian rules. So, accelerated approvals. Now, accelerated approvals is something that was also sought after by all these vaccines that have been introduced in India in the context of COVID-19. So, all the COVID-19 vaccines, because of course COVID-19 also was a special situation, an emergency situation. So, under these kind of conditions, India has a provision for accelerated approvals of the vaccines and the medicines or the drugs. So, that's why under this particular provision, we see that this is something that has been adopted by India, and that's why the authorization has been given as a part of the approval or accelerated approvals in India. So, that's why accelerated approval is something which is a part of the Indian rules. So, that's why not the US. So, this is also a wrong statement. We have been asked to consider the correct statement. So, there is only one statement which is correct, that is one only. So, B is the correct option. All right. Moving on, the next question. So, here what we discussed is, that here let's consider this question. Statements regarding COVID vaccine intelligence network. COVID vaccine intelligence network. So, what exactly is COVID vaccine intelligence network? This is basically a network or a setup that was developed in India or has been taken in India for proper tracking of everything related to COVID-19 vaccines. Whether vaccines are being stored in proper conditions, how many vaccines do we have, how many vaccines of which variant do we have, how the vaccines are being given, who is still supposed to get the vaccine, who has received all the required vaccines. So, all these kind of databases, each and everything related to COVID-19 vaccination in India, you'll see that all these have become a part of the COVID vaccine intelligence network. So, if you look at the second statement, it facilitates real-time information of vaccine stocks, storage, temperature, and track the listed beneficiaries for COVID-19 vaccination. This is correct. This is precisely what it is. So, even applications like CoWIN, etc., they all are a part of this network. The first statement, it has been developed by the Ministry of Science and Technology. This is wrong, because this was done by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So, that's why this is wrong. And so, this was what? This was the Health Ministry. This was by the Health Ministry. So, that's why the first statement is wrong. The first statement is wrong, the second statement is correct. We have been asked what is correct. So, only the second statement is correct. So, correct answer here will be B. The correct answer here will be B. Moving on, the next question. How is SARS-CoV different from MERS-CoV? SARS-CoV emerged in China, whereas MERS-CoV emerged in Saudi Arabia. This is correct. This is precisely what had happened, that SARS had emerged from China, whereas MERS had emerged from Saudi Arabia. Second is SARS-CoV mortality rate is higher than MERS-CoV. Now, this is not correct, because what we saw was that for SARS-CoV the mortality rate actually was lower. It was, I think, in the range of 10 to 12, I think 10-11%. So, mortality rate was almost 11%, whereas in case of MERS-CoV we have seen that it could go as high as 35%. So, mortality rate of MERS-CoV was much higher as compared to SARS-CoV. So, that's why this statement is not correct. The third is outbreak of coronavirus was caused by SARS-CoV. Now, this I would say is a kind of a trick statement. Read it carefully. What we are saying is that outbreak of coronavirus was caused by SARS-CoV. Now remember that here we are talking about coronavirus. We are not talking about COVID-19, because if let's say the same statement, if the same statement had said outbreak of COVID-19 was caused by SARS-CoV, this would have been wrong. But here we are not talking about COVID-19, we are talking about coronavirus. And SARS-CoV is what? We discussed this. There are three deadly variants of coronavirus: SARS-CoV, SARS-CoV-2 and MERS-CoV. So that's why SARS-CoV is an outbreak of coronavirus. Yes, it is. So that's why outbreak of coronavirus was caused by SARS-CoV is a correct statement. So please don't confuse, because in general we are used to using the term coronavirus instead of COVID-19. So this coronavirus, you have to understand that there are various variants of coronavirus, out of which SARS-CoV-2 is one of those variants, and this variant has caused COVID-19. So that's why if let's say the same statement had said outbreak of COVID-19, then it was a wrong statement, but here it is saying outbreak of coronavirus. So that's why this is correct. So that's why this third statement is correct. So these two statements, that is 1 and 3, both these statements given here, these are correct statements. Alright, moving on. Consider the following statements regarding latent viral infection. Now, what do we mean by latent? First of all, the meaning of latent is hidden. Something that is hidden can be called as latent. So that's why when we say latent viral infection, we are saying that this is a kind of hidden viral infection. This is a kind of viral infection which is hidden. How exactly is it hidden? Because it does not, many a times it will not show any symptom, and even if it shows symptoms, it might not show its own symptoms. That's why we would say that it is hidden. That's why we would say that it is a latent infection. So if you look at the three statements that have been given with regards to this, the first is something, first is latent infections last the life of the host. This is correct. We have seen that in case of latent infections, they are many a times they are dormant, they are inert, they will be dormant or inert, you can say. So because they are dormant or inert, we might not observe them, we might not be able to detect them, we might not know about their existence, but they might exist in the body as long as the host exists. So that's why latent infections last the life of the host is a correct statement. Second statement is HIV is an example of latent viral infection. This is also correct. Now correct in what context? What happens with HIV infection? When let's say if somebody is infected with HIV and is suffering from HIV AIDS, what happens there is that AIDS is what? AIDS is an immunodeficiency syndrome. That it is not a disease in itself, but what AIDS basically does is, or what HIV virus basically does is, that it makes the immune system very weak. The immune system of whoever is suffering from HIV AIDS would be very weak. And now because the immune system is very weak, the body or the immune system is not able to fight off the infections. It is not able to fight off the infections. And because it is not able to fight off the infections, there are a lot of diseases which might start to occur simultaneously in such a person. So for example, let's say things like tuberculosis may happen easily. Let's say common cold, fever, cough, etc. might happen very easily. So what happens is that it does not have a symptom of its own, but rather it brings in a lot of diseases with itself, because it lessens or weakens the immune response of the body. The immune system is affected by HIV. So this is what the problem is, and that's why HIV also can be taken as an example of latent viral infection. The third statement is latent viral infection usually does not cause any noticeable symptoms. Even this is correct. This is precisely what we discussed about, that even if they do exist in the body, many a times the person who is infected with a latent viral infection might not come to know that they are suffering from latent viral infection, or there is a virus which is residing in their body, because they might not show any symptom and they might just remain hidden there. So that's why this is called as a latent viral infection. So that's why this also is a correct statement. So all these three statements given here, they are correct. So the correct answer here will be 1, 2 and 3. Moving on, the next question. With reference to plant-based vaccine, consider the following statements. 1. USA approved the use of Covifenz, the world's first plant-based COVID-19 vaccine. Second, plant-derived COVID vaccines uses same technology as mRNA. Third statement, it aims to engineer a virus-like protein in living plants. And fourth, they emerge as an affordable alternative. Now, plant-based vaccines basically have been in news in the context that plant-based vaccines were approved for use in Canada. Alright, so approval was basically not given by the US, approval was given by Canada, and that's why it was in the news that approval was given by Canada for plant-based vaccine against COVID-19. So, first statement definitely wrong. Now, if you look at the statements that we have here, you have one here, you have one here, and you have all of the above as the last statement. So, we are anyway left with only one option that could be correct, that is 3 and 4 only. But still, let's have a look at them. Plant-derived COVID vaccines uses the same technology as mRNA. No, they have nothing to do with the messenger RNAs, and there is only one specific type of vaccine which uses mRNA, the mRNA vaccines which have been used in the case of COVID-19, I mean by companies like Pfizer, Moderna, etc. They have made the use of mRNA vaccines. So that's why these plant-based vaccines, they have nothing to do with mRNA vaccines, and their mechanism is nowhere similar to the mRNA vaccines. So that's why second statement definitely is also wrong. It aims to engineer a virus-like protein in living plants. This is correct, and they emerge as an affordable alternative, is basically because of which we are and the world in general is also considering these vaccines. So that's why statement number 3 and 4 given here, both the statements are correct. Moving on, the next question. Consider the following statements. Adenoviruses are single-stranded RNA virus. Viral vector-based vaccines use the body's own cells to produce antigens, and RVSV-Zebov is a viral vector vaccine against Ebola. So first we are talking about adenovirus. Now what is adenovirus? Adenovirus basically is what? It is a double-stranded. It is a double-stranded DNA virus. Alright, it is a double-stranded DNA virus. So that's why neither it is single-stranded nor it is an RNA virus. So that's why both the parts of this sentence is wrong. So statement number 1 definitely wrong. Statement number 2, viral vector-based vaccines use the body's own cells to produce antigens. Is this correct? Yes, this is correct. Why exactly is this correct? Just understand this, that when we say viral vector vaccine, now what do we mean? Why viral? Because we are making the use of a virus. Why vector? Because this virus is being used as a carrier. Alright. So because it is being used as a carrier, it uses the body's cells to carry the antigens. Alright. They use the body's ends to produce the antigens, and that's why they are called as viral vector vaccines, because they would be used as carriers. These viruses will be used as carriers. So this is what happens here. So that's why this is perfectly correct. And RVSV-Zebov is a viral vector vaccine against Ebola. This is also correct, and this was again in news. So that's why second and the third statements are correct. So correct answer here will be 2 and 3 only. So just understand these are some of the factual areas, I would say. So not very difficult for you to remember them, but yes, they in one way or the other have been in the news. So just understand what exactly they are and why they are in the news. Moving on, next question. With reference to norovirus, consider the following statements. 1. Norovirus is highly contagious and can be transmitted through contaminated food, water and surfaces. Second is norovirus is similar to diarrhea causing rotavirus. And third, there are well-developed vaccines against norovirus. Now, norovirus basically, yes, it is highly contagious and it is very similar to rotavirus. It also can be transmitted through contaminated food, through contaminated water, through these surfaces. So all these can be the carriers of this particular norovirus. So yes, norovirus can happen through them, and they can cause diseases or symptoms like diarrhea. So that's why the first two statements that we have here, both the statements are actually correct. So statement number 1 is also correct and statement number 2 is also correct. The third statement is that there are well developed vaccines against norovirus. Now this is not correct. We do have vaccines against rotavirus, all right. There are well developed vaccines against rotavirus, but not against norovirus. All right. Against rotavirus, we do have well developed vaccines, and they have been a part of India's immunization program as well. But against norovirus, until now, we do not really have a functional vaccine. There are vaccines which are under development, but we do not really have a functional vaccine against norovirus. So that's why norovirus right now does not have a functional vaccine. So practically you can say no vaccine right now. No vaccine presently. Alright, so that's why the third statement is not correct. Third statement is not correct. So first two statements are correct. So correct answer, that's why will be A. The correct answer will be A. Moving on, next question. Coronavirus is categorized into 4 genera: alpha, beta, gamma and delta. 1. Alpha and beta commonly infect birds. Second, gamma and delta mainly infect mammals such as bats and humans. Now I know this is a very off question because not directly related, but you will see that in one way or the other they also have been mentioned sometimes in the newspaper, that there are all these variants, and all these variants, there are some variants which will infect only mammals etc., and there are some which will infect the birds. So if you look at alpha and beta actually they infect mammals. Alright, alpha and beta they infect mammals, so that's why they will infect bats and humans. Whereas when it comes to gamma and delta they infect birds. They infect birds, so that's why 1 and 2, basically these two statements have been exchanged. So neither 1 is correct nor 2 is correct, so that's why the correct answer here will be D. That is neither 1 nor 2. Alright, moving on, the last question for the day. Consider the following statements regarding black fungus. 1. It is a rare fungal infection caused by a group of molds known as mucormycetes. Then its symptoms include facial swelling, nasal congestion and headache. And third, mucormycetes live throughout the environment and is ubiquitous in nature. Now, you might have seen that these terms also have been in news, like for example, black fungus was in news, correct? We saw that black fungus was in news. Also, white fungus was in news. We saw another variant come up which was yellow fungus, and later on there were certain cases of something called as the green fungus also, right? So all these were in news. They, in one way or the other, they were in news. So when we talk about these infections, they are caused of course by fungi. And when it comes to black fungus or white fungus or yellow fungus, we see that all these are from very similar category, whereas when it comes to the green fungus is from a slightly different category. Alright, green fungus is from a slightly different category, whereas white, yellow and black, these three are from a similar category. So these two, when we talk about them, the first one, that is black fungus, sometimes it is also called as mucormycosis. So just remember this term may be mucormycosis. This is the name of the disease which is associated with black fungus or white fungus. And even yellow fungus also is very similar in this scenario. And the last one that you see here, that is green fungus. Green fungus basically is related to aspergillus. Just remember this, that it is related to what? It is related to aspergillus. So just the keywords, if you just remember the keywords, because we saw that for many of the patients who were suffering from COVID-19, after recovering from COVID-19, they started getting the infections or the symptoms related to these diseases. Where specifically when it comes to white fungus, we saw that white fungus was a much more deadlier version of all these other infections that we saw. Some of the symptoms also that we saw were very similar to the symptoms of COVID, so they were also misunderstood as COVID sometimes, but then it was realized that these were not infections related to COVID-19, but rather they were related to fungal infections. So these kind of fungal infections may happen in certain situations, in certain cases, and that's why our understanding of all these situations is also very, very important. For example, we saw that hygiene became a very important factor, especially in case of black fungus, white fungus, etc., in yellow fungus also, in green fungus also. Specifically, it was said that it is related to hygiene. So somebody who maintains a good hygiene after dealing with the infection, they would be safe from it. But otherwise, if people are living in unhygienic conditions, then there are higher chances that they might get infected with the virus, with the fungus. So that's why these actually were in the news from the perspective of these infections which were growing after somebody was infected with the COVID-19, and that's why they started to create another panicky situation in such scenarios. So that's why just remember that these all were in news and what they are related to. So the first statement, if you look at the statements that we have, the first statement here, this is correct. The second statement about the symptoms also is correct, and the third statement also is correct. So all these three statements given here with regards to black fungus is important. Now, not only black fungus, please remember that black fungus, white fungus, yellow fungus, all these are going to be important. Their scientific names, their symptoms, and under what conditions they happened, all these things related to them, all these pieces of information related to them, they all will be equally important for your examination. So please make sure that when you revise all these topics, you do revise all these things. So that's why 1, 2 and 3, all these are correct. So that's why the correct answer here will be D. The correct answer will be all of the above, that is 1, 2 and 3. So this is the end of the session with me. We have discussed a lot of areas. We have discussed some of the key areas which I believe could be important for your prelims examination. So please make sure that while you go for your examination, before you do your last revision, you revise all these areas, you revise all these peripheral areas also related to all these things that we saw. I hope that some of the questions do come from whatever we discussed here, but please make sure that it's not only about these questions that you do, but rather the topics that we discussed through these questions. Alright, so all these topics will become equally important for you in the examination. So I hope that these topics are the only places where from the questions come, but you can never be very sure. Please make sure that whatever current affairs you have, whatever discussions, whatever revisions you have done, whatever you have studied over the last 1 year, please make sure that you revise them well before going into the examination. So with this, I will take your leave. This is the end of the sessions with me for Science and Technology. I hope that all these sessions help you. All these sessions have been helpful for your revision. And this is where I'll take your leave. Good night. All the very best for your examination. Thank you.